Welcome to the Live to Lift Up podcast. This is a storytelling space to honor the life, the love, the values, and the legacy of our dear Sandy Mahanathan. My name is Danielle Mahanathan, the host of this podcast. And on each episode, we bring to you a special guest. Someone who equally valued and aligned with the legacy of Sandy Mahanathan, my mom. And today, I'd like to welcome to you all, Italia. Hi.
Hi, Danielle. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this initiative.
Thank you. So before we get into it, I'd like to reshare with our listeners why LiftUp. So we created this podcast for several reasons. And the name in LiftUp is a very specific acronym. The L stands for love, to love unconditionally, because Mom loved freely, with reckless abandon, and without limits or expectations. The I stands for inspire, through kindness, because she inspired not just through the words that she spoke, but via her actions, and consistently so. The F is for foster, fostering growth and harmony, leaving every place better than how she found it before, and for what that meant for another human being. And she believed in nurturing people and places to bring out their best. The T stands for together, because together we lift as we rise. And she lived by that belief, truly, that as we each rise, we had the opportunity to bring others along with us. The U stands for universal, because Mom was truly a universal global citizen, and she loved beyond borders and boundaries, regardless of faith, culture, background, and absolutely saw everyone as connected. And the P is for passion, to love with passion, because she truly lived this wholeheartedly in her faith, creativity, and via the things that she loved. So without further ado, I'd love to bring in our guest Italia to dig deeper into, firstly, who Italia is, and thereafter to share with you all the beautiful and special bond, not just personally, that Italia and Mom created and expanded on over many years, but also a deeply professional one, where it was almost, if I could say, the coached becoming the coach and vice versa. So without further ado, hi again, Italia, and thank you once again, heartfelt, for being here today with all of us. And we're looking forward to you sharing many, many stories and experiences with us today. But before I get into that, if you could please share with us who you are, a little bit about yourself, so any of our listeners have some context.
So my name is Italia Boninelli. I was born and raised in South Africa, although I did do one of my degrees at the University of Padua in Italy. And as you can hear from the names, there's a strong Italian connection, so Italy, South Africa. I've spent most of my career in the HR field, probably 35 years or more. My last executive role was Chief People Officer for Anglo Gold Ashanti. Prior to that, Chief People Officer for Goldfields Mining. Prior to that, for Netcare Hospital Group. And prior to that, I was HR Director at the retail division of Standard Bank. And earlier in my career, a variety of other HR roles. At the moment, I tried to take retirement, but that didn't last long. So I'm now sitting on boards and doing executive coaching and some HR consulting, which is part of what I'll talk about a little later that I think Sandy had in mind to do in the next stage of her career. I think I've known Sandy for 22 years, and it's been 22 years of a wonderful professional relationship, but also a wonderful personal friendship, a very close personal friendship. If they said you can only invite 5 or 6 friends to an event, who would you pick? She would have been in the top 5 or 6 globally of all my friends that I would have wanted, at a birthday, at a wedding, or any special event. So I don't know if you know when I met your mom. It was late 2003. Another colleague of mine, Terry Mayer, and I had decided that we were going to put together a book on leadership for South Africa. And at that stage, we'd written some of the chapters, but we were looking for other HR professionals and other business people to write chapters. And Terry introduced me at, I think it was a brunch, to a number of HR directors, of which one was Sandy. And that's where I met her, and that's where the relationship first started to flourish. And although in the end she didn't contribute to either of the two books that we published in 2004, I still remember that as a very special occasion because that was the start of a great friendship. She was at that stage at Accenture as HR lead, although she did shortly after I'd met her, because by the second time I met her, I think she'd already moved on to Microsoft as the HR director there. But she was always warm and engaging and so happy to see you and so generous with her time and so welcoming. You always felt welcome in her presence. It was one of the standout characteristics was just her personal warmth was amazing. I think if I think back about how did I experience Sandy as an HR professional, again, on a professional front and on a personal front, because although she and I never worked in the same space, my daughter was at Accenture in the years 2006, 2007, and Sandy was her HR director. And during that time, there were, as inevitably they always are, some moments of difficulty. And I recommended to my daughter Daniela to go and see Sandy. And Sandy was so empathetic and so supportive and so professional. To this day, Daniela still remembers her good advice. But Sandy and I also became part of a network of HR managers and directors that would meet from time to time, like maybe every second month, and just share ideas and share best practice. And she was always more than willing to share all her work if that would benefit anybody. And we would spend time together at the IPN conferences in Sun City, initially as attendees and then later on as speakers. I think the thing that I remember the most about Sandy as an HR professional is just how committed she was to developing talent. Talent management was her passion. I know HR covers many things. It covers remuneration, benefits, and labor relations, and recruitment, and a whole lot of things. But talent management was her absolute passion. And she was extremely well respected in that field. And she just had a natural way of finding talent and helping to bring that talent through. And also, although she'd never trained as a professional coach, she was already early in her career using very good coaching techniques. I remember her, saying, we mustn't just share best practice at the HR director level. We must spend time with our teams explaining what good looks like. And that's a sign of a great leader because, it can take you 2 minutes to explain what good looks like compared to the picture people may have in their heads. So if I asked you, Danielle, to do some recruitment, you would do the standard stuff. You would look at the role description and write a man specification and give it to a recruitment agency and get the CVs and, go through the CVs and pick some to interview and so on, which is what most people would think of when they think of recruitment. But she would sit and explain to her team how they could make everything better. So she would say, when you write the man specification, don't just write the basic information you find in the role description. Write about the company. What is the company strategy, the company culture? What kind of person would fit in well here? And so she would go through every step and explain exactly what good looks like. And you can't underestimate the impact that kind of style of leadership has on the people growing up under you. Because I've worked for bosses like that, and I know what an impact it had on me. So I'm sure it had a great impact on her team. Just in terms of being a friend, such an open heart and a ready ear, and always willing to help and always willing to be there for people in their moments of difficulty. We had so many wonderful dinners at my house in Bedford View or at her house in Paulshof. We went to music concerts together. I remember lying on the grass in New York's Park listening to, some jazz music. And we spent numerous holidays together. We went on hiking trips. We did the Dolphin Trail and some other very taxing hiking trips that were over 3 or 4 days, where you literally walked for 8 hours a day. And because my husband and I were amongst the oldest in the group, we needed encouragement. And she would provide that to help us get up the mountain. She invited us to Platinum Schloti, and we invited, Sandy and Claude we had timeshare in a chalet in the Drakensberg, and they came with us, and we did wonderful hikes up the Drakensberg. And she was really a pleasure to be with. She was always cheerful and interesting. She just had a knack of making you feel at home, and she could hold her own in any conversation and be really, interesting to have around and to exchange ideas with. I think one of the things that you asked me is, where did I personally experience Sandy lifting people up? There was a particular incident that I remember, or a particular initiative. In 2016, I decided to formalize my coaching qualifications. And so I'd enrolled in a course with a Professor Peter Hawkins and another Professor John Leary Joyce, who were both acknowledged leaders in the field of coaching. And a colleague of mine who was on the same course, Barbara Walsh, and I were doing the team coaching diploma at that point. And I remember meeting with Sandy and discussing, the benefits of team coaching, because one of my experiences had been you can coach an individual, but if nothing in the environment changes, they find it very difficult to change what they're doing, because everybody, in a sense, expects them to behave exactly the way they were behaving before. And the environment doesn't necessarily create the space for them to do things differently or behave differently. But the minute that your mom heard about this initiative, she was so enthusiastic and jumped on the opportunity and said, I'm trying to groom successors for my position in my HR team. Come and do some team coaching with the HR team at Accenture. Now, a lot of HR directors would not so easily have said, come and do this, because they would have been a little bit nervous. Maybe another HR director will, see something that's not quite right. She was completely relaxed. It was just how open she was to new ideas and how focused she was on development, that she didn't feel the slightest bit, even slightly threatened. She just saw it as a great opportunity. So then we went to see together the Accenture CEO at the time, who was William Mazimba, and explained to him what, the benefits of this would be. And he spent quite a lot of time talking about the strategy of the company. And then Sandy and I sat afterwards saying, how was HR going to support this? And from there, we started designing the team coaching initiative together. And her team really did grow as a result of that. But they grew also because Sandy, I mentioned earlier, she's a natural coach. She was very committed to this process. She supported it in every way possible, despite a really, really busy calendar. And I think one of the coaching principles is that you must meet people where they are at. So whenever I coach, I try to think of several things. One is kind of, what is the history and the context for this person? Where have they come from? What experiences had they had? Because very often people are telling themselves a story inside their heads about who they are. And you need to understand what that story is. Because this is not lecturing where you prepare your notes and you stand in front of, 100 people in the lecture hall and you deliver the same lecture to everybody. It doesn't matter where they're at. Coaching is very, very tailored to meeting people when they're at. You also need to understand their style, because people receive information in different ways. So if you are kind of very detail orientated and very numbers orientated, like an accountant would be, or like an engineer would be, you process and receive information very differently to somebody who perhaps is more of a creative personality, who thinks out of the box, who is prepared to take risks, who will adapt to change really, really quickly. you've got to adapt your style of coaching to where, to where people are at that point in time, but also to how they receive information. And also then just being very clear on what you want to help them achieve. So Sandy and I often used to compare notes about, the many, many, many hundreds of CVs we'd read over the years of being in HR. And, what the good ones looked like and what the not so good ones looked like. And I think the average person writes their CV from this year to this year in this company, in this role. Then they go and cut, copy, paste out of their role description and they just stick it into their CV. But the really good candidates don't write their CVs that way. They write their CVs as a set of key achievements of where they've had an impact on the company and how they measure that impact. And Sandy understood that really well because that's what made her a standout HR director. Because there are HR people and HR people and HR people functioning at very different levels of work. The very top people understand the impact they're having on the business, and they really understand the business strategy and how the people strategy should be supporting that. And that was why, one of the things that made her a standout HR professional. So we did this team coaching, and she literally, I think, was following all those coaching principles intuitively. And in fact, at a later stage, when we spoke about what she could do, in the next phase of her life, I said to her, you should go and just get a formal coaching qualification. You'd be an absolutely superb coach, not just, in the HR field or in things that but much more broadly in business. So I don't know if, she ever investigated that, but it was certainly one of the things that we spoke about. When you and I spoke the other day, you also said to me that you were very surprised to hear that Sandy had asked to be coached, because you're so used to hearing how many people she's mentored and coached that, experiencing that in the opposite direction. But that was just Sandy. I mean, she was very open to it. She knew I'd qualified as an executive coach, and she just said to me, I need to plan the next few years of my life so that the next phase of my life can be very different. She wanted to be financially independent enough that she could still support her family, but also support many good causes that she was involved in, which I think a lot of people are not aware how many different causes she was supporting, and in some cases supporting other people who were struggling. So she wanted to be financially independent enough to do that. And also just to, I think, have more time to spend with her family. She'd worked very hard all her life. So we met and we started kind of planning the future path. And one of the things that I remember us discussing was what would it take financially for her to achieve that? And we soon came to the conclusion that her current savings weren't enough to allow her to think of retiring out of a corporate role in the next 2 or 3 years. So we spoke about what some alternative courses of action might be. Well, Sandy, true to style, didn't let, any time go to waste. Literally a few months later, she announced to me she was going to the UAE and she'd accepted a job in the UAE. And I said, that fast? I mean, wow. You certainly don't waste time. She said, no, look, the pay there is much higher, the tax is much lower. And if I'm going to achieve my objectives, I need to put things into action. And I'm sure you'll agree, Danielle, that that's exactly what your mother did in every aspect of her life. Once she had set her sights on the target, she would just put plans into action and start moving. So she landed up, I think initially it was Digital 14, if I remember correctly, and then Dark Matter, and then eventually Group Amana, where she had the biggest impact in her HR role, which is obviously what we'd come to expect of her anyway. And then after a few years, we'd visited her in Dubai. Sandy and Claude had shown us all the sights of Dubai. We had such a wonderful time there. But it was June 2025. She contacted me and said they were going to be out in South Africa for just a few days. And so we met at Melrose Arch for a brunch, and she was all excited to tell me some news. And I got there all curious to know what the news was. And she announced, I made my target. I made my target. And I said, wow, that's fantastic. So what now? She said, I've already told them I'm retiring in December. I said, wow, I'm just utterly amazed at, your dedication, your focus. And in reality, she had achieved what was quite an ambitious target in the space of just a few years. I can't remember exactly if it was 4 or 5 years, but it wasn't very long at all. And we were so happy. And she was talking about the house that she was building in Cape Town. And it said, once it's built next year, you must come and visit us. And then, unfortunately, in the August, I got the bad news that, she passed away from a sudden heart attack. So I think, she's left such a legacy of lifting up people, such a legacy of how to live your life, planning for the future, but experiencing the present with great intensity and great passion and great presence. Presence is such a precious thing, because so many people I find today are so distracted that even if you're having a conversation, they're busy texting on their phones, or they, looking distracted, or they can't even wait for you to finish the sentence, and they're interrupting you just to tell you what they're thinking, and they're not really listening to what you're saying. She would always grace you with enormous presence. She left such a legacy in all of those respects. I'm just sorry she couldn't, after all that planning, enjoy the next phase of her life, which I'm sure would have been not in a corporate world, but equally as busy, equally as dynamic, and still leaving an impact. Maybe not on corporates, but on people's lives and on communities and on her family and on her circle of friends. So those are kind of my recollections. She's going to be sorely missed as a colleague, but much more sorely missed as a friend. She was a wonderful example. A lot of HR people that I've spoken to remember her for the true HR professional she was, because the standout HR professionals are few and far between. Many do routine HR. They do their labor relations, they do their recruitment, but the ones who have a serious and meaningful impact on organizations, those are memorable. And she was definitely in that category and in that class. So those are just some recollections that I have. And it's wonderful to have this opportunity to be able to honor her and to share that, and to, share the love I had for your mom. And she will always be in my heart.
You've given an equal measure of not just, sure, the career powerhouse that mom has left a legacy in, and you've said it so beautifully. There's a difference between an HR professional and somebody that really makes an impact and shows the value. And with that, what you've beautifully done, I feel this has been somewhat of a coaching lesson to all of us listening today, and that you've taken the qualities that makes one stand out above the rest. So things like focus, having goals, having a vision, having coaches and mentors, putting yourself out there, having a strong sense of self, believing in what it is that you're working towards, and letting nothing come in the way of that. The importance and the brevity of presence, deep presence, because that alone creates something valuable for the listener, or the not just the listener, but the person that you're sitting with, and you're giving of your time. It means you're giving a full aspect and part of yourself. So not only have you taken qualities from a professional side that mom absolutely had, and innately so, it was authentically who she was in her DNA, and what it could potentially take to go from, I suppose, the bare minimum to absolutely exceptional in your craft, because I think that transcends just
Yes.
the HR field, but any profession you might find yourself in. So thank you for highlighting all that you have. But what you also did is you took it so beautifully by integrating personal experience, because at the end of the day, yes, we have careers, we have how we generate an income, our financial goals, which mom shot the lights out. I love that story about coming and having brunch with you and saying, I met my target. I can actually picture this in my head. I met my target. And like you said, extremely earlier than what somebody might anticipate, right? Because they weren't in the UAE for that long, relatively speaking, and yet here she was. But what you've done is you've taken the personal account of the human being, because at the end of the day, the human experience is one that sticks with us.
Yes.
Right. And I feel that no matter what we might be going through, to meet each other, you said it so profoundly and accurately, meet each other where we're at. I think that depth of compassion for, we're not perfect, we might not always get it right, but it can be changed. We can change any situation or take it from where it was into a different space to leave somebody feeling better. And that takes presence, that takes deep listening, that takes getting to know the human being for where they're at. You said it at the very beginning. Often, the styles of just spray and pray, or listen to me, I'm going to give you a solution therefore as a one size fits all. That's not really how life works, is it? It is about understanding the story, and I love how you framed this. The story that we tell ourselves, understanding what is that story that each of us are telling ourselves, that paint our own pictures, to be able to listen in on that and hone in and ask the right questions, be curious. Sandy Mahanathan was an exceptionally curious human being, like a kid in a candy store. Learning was something that she got a kick out of it. She got a kick out of not being the smartest person in the room, because she knew she was about to expand her being in ways that she wasn't ready for. And that really, I think the integration of how you've shared not just the professional but the personal gives such a holistic picture of how she married the two. Like you said, you get an HR professional and you get a Sandy, where it was almost like the one was made for the other, or vice versa. The role was made for who she was in her DNA. And Italia, even sharing the story about your daughter and how that story, not just for you but for your daughter, still lives on, and how it's still so valuable and real for her. That in itself is a legacy. And there's a saying that says your legacy is every life that you touched. And if I look at the expansion for how many mom was able to touch, that for me speaks volumes. That for me speaks of a life that is wealthy and rich and fulfilled. Because you're right, even in the phase of moving into retirement and looking at what she was wanting to do, and I'm really grateful you both spoke about coaching and how she could really not just benefit for herself but continue to make that impact after leaving corporate. She lived a life of presence but with vision. It was almost 1 foot in, 1 foot out, constantly and consistently so. And I think, as a coach and somebody who coached mom, I'd love to ask you, what did you find were your most favorite qualities about coaching somebody like mom?
There's an old joke about how many psychologists does it take to change a light bulb? And the answer is only one, but the light bulb must really want to change. And it's the same with coaching, in the sense that sometimes companies appoint coaches to people, but unless they are open to change, it's not always a successful initiative. I think Sandy was so open to new ideas, and really, she wasn't talking about retirement in the traditional sense. Retirement in the traditional sense is you work at 120 kilometers an hour, and then one day you just go off the cliff to zero, and do nothing, sit on your porch and drink a beer. I don't know. She wasn't talking about that. She was talking, and we were talking about a step down strategy, which is maybe not quite the same pressure. Step down and work at that level, then step down and work at that level. Because I firmly believe that, as humankind goes forward, the notion that you just stop working at age 60 or 63 or whatever date you pick for your retirement and never do anything again is completely obsolete. And I think that's the way she saw it. She wanted to continue to give back. So that's why she saw coaching as one of those options. She was thinking about some board roles. So you asked me what was great about coaching her. Number one, great intellect, great ideas coming from her. So it was a process of co-creation, not a lecture from my side to her. But secondly, just so open and so willing to commit. So as I said to you, we agree a course of action, and she goes quiet for a month or two, and I think, okay, I'm sure she's working on it. And then she comes back and announces, I'm leaving, I'm going, I'm doing, I'm up. Wow. If all the people that I coached were quite that decisive in taking action, because I think one of the things that coaching can do, I've seen so many people with great potential who don't quite achieve all their potential, either because, there might be health issues or personal emotional issues, but very often because they don't get the right exposure or the right opportunities. But to some extent, you have to create that yourself. You have to be out there looking for the magic with your eyes wide open. And, as the magic, flies past you like a butterfly or a dragonfly, you have to grab it with both hands and catch it. And she was one of those. So you didn't have to explain the elements of magic, in too much detail to her. And she would literally jump off her chair and catch it with both hands and go forward. So it was always wonderful having discussions with her and seeing just, how enthusiastic she was about what we were doing.
It's such an apt way to have summarized your favorite parts about coaching her. And I'm going to flip this question around. What did mom teach you? What did she impart to you, not in both a professional and a personal capacity?
I think one of the things that always used to impress me about her was that even people that she maybe didn't initially want to, or that were difficult personalities, she would always give them the benefit of the doubt and try to find the good in people. And I think that we need constant reminders of that. I remember once working, with a colleague, and he was a very grumpy gentleman. You'd come in the morning, say, morning, all cheerfully. He'd go, morning. You'd think, goodness me, what did I do wrong? Nobody actually asked him what was wrong. We only found out at the end of that year when we saw the funeral notice that his wife had been dying of brain cancer the entire year. And when you see things like that happening, you realize, how often do we just say to somebody, hi, how are you? And they just say, I'm fine, thanks, and you. And we don't actually stop to find out how they really are. Your mom taught me that, even behind the people that are grumpy, there might be a really good, genuine person who's just having a tough time. Take the time to find out what's really going on. And that's a lesson that I always tried to remember because, it was something she was exceptionally good at.
That is profound, and that hits straight to the heart center. It really does. When we talk about lift up, loving unconditionally, I really believe then that highlights that value of loving unconditionally, because she really did have this ability. It was seeking to better understand it, and not from the point of you getting it. It was just to provide enough context to give it peace and leave it alone, because we don't know what another person is going through.
No.
And if I think about the remaining letters of the acronym in INSPIRE, right, through kindness, 100%, she gave it kindness. She gave it exactly like you're saying. There must be something going on. So let me do what I can. But if not, I'm going to walk away and just give it love in my heart and in my soul. I think if for foster growth and harmony, the harmonious nature for which she did things. And I even remember in her, her last months of last year, and how I'd shared with somebody that even in how she physically engaged with things had become so gentle. I think she just wanted to leave things in harmony and in a better space. And if that meant her walking away, she did that versus adding to the fire. Tea together, you've shared so much about how your hubby, mom and dad did together, from hikes to genuinely soul-fulfilling experiences. You did it together, and in sharing what you coached mom with and what she coached you with, how you did life together. And even if a month had gone by and no word, or 2 months, she would always come back to say, I've done it. And that took a journey of coming together and meeting each other where you're at, and having that communication model and bond and relationship to go, but we're doing this together. We're rising together. We're achieving it together. It's as equally my successes and life as it is that I'm sharing and bringing you along with me. So we do it together. Universe, I mean, your travels, right? And the enrichment of each of your experiences and bringing that together, I think added to a depth of your relationships and the perspectives. I think that really did broaden the perspectives that both of you gave and brought to one another. And that's incredibly important.
Yes.
And then the passion. I mean, Italia, we've known you long enough, and you too are incredibly passionate. I don't think I've ever seen you or mom do anything half measured. It wasn't just doing it for the sake of doing it. You did it. There was no point. I think the Italian and the Indian and the merge of that and the passion is so profound. I mean, even for yourself, in that realizing retirement wasn't for you. And like you said, I love how you put this down visually, is that it's a step down strategy. It's not a drop. Also for women like yourselves, I don't think that would be the best use of yourselves, especially when you still have so much to give and, to share freely in the space. There's a lot that pains me, and mom still had so much to give. There was still so much about her that she was able to impart and impact, but I suppose none of us have control over this. When it is our time, it is our time. But to also share here, we had been discussing in the last month that we would collaborate as well. And it was such an exciting thing, because my encouragement to her was, please write a book. You are a wealth of wisdom and experience and knowledge and information and encouragement and LiftUp. That is who you are. Please write a book, because it would be a travesty for this to just disappear, right? But I feel in this podcast, to digress a bit, and stories and how you have shared this journey and this layer and perspective of mom, this context continues to keep that alive. And for any of our listeners to go, wait a minute, there's still inspiration here, and this will live on till the end of time. But for me, who sits here now, where I won't physically get to collaborate with my mother, and as I was sharing, I'm so looking forward to it, because it was a vision that we were building that I knew would make an even bigger impact, based on we're at a different stage of our journey, and we both have very clear strengths and skills that we could continue to keep it going and serve humanity. But I believe stories like yours, Italia, and how you've shared it, give exactly that. It's really, you've done a phenomenal job for our listeners to show that it lives like this. Professional, personal, life, it coexists. So thank you for honoring the legacy and the values and the lessons so beautifully in the stories that you've shared here today. It's been incredibly supportive. I've learned an incredible amount just by listening to you. I can understand why your job and purpose is still not done. I can understand why you are still here to fulfill on all that you need to. And I would be remiss if I didn't get you to please share a story on a coaching technique you'd imparted to a group of people recently, because it really had me in stitches. But it was also another penny drop for how to get creative, how to meet people where they're at, how to break the ice. They were just when listening to you, and I really would appreciate you sharing this. That story really stuck with me because it says a lot. So please, if I could ask you graciously to share that.
I assume you're talking about the group of geologists that I was coaching.
Yes, I am.
All right, so for the listeners, I'm doing some work together with BHP Billiton. BHP Billiton are taking a different route to exploration by investing quite heavily into junior explorers. The junior explorers often have made good finds in terms of minerals in the ground, but lack the managerial strategy, commercial or other experience to, make a success of their companies quickly. They very often struggle for years to make a success. What BHP Billiton is doing is, besides investing money in these junior explorers, they're investing coaching to help them accelerate up their own growth curve as fast as possible. So part of it is leadership coaching, which I'm doing. Part of it is business coaching, which somebody else is doing. And part of it is technical coaching on the technical aspects of geology, including systems that BHP Billiton uses like mineral systems. So they have a mineral systems framework that they use to interpret geological data. The challenge that I was set was a lot of these great technical geological sciences experts are great in their expertise and knowledge, but maybe partially due to their profession, where I think they spend so much time looking at rocks that perhaps they tend to be somewhat introverted. They talk to the facts. They were not necessarily making good coaches. So I was asked to give them some training on how to be a good coach. But I could see when I started the workshop that a lot of these senior geologists who've been geologists for 20 or 25 or more years were looking at me as a non-geologist and thinking, okay, what on earth is she going to teach us? So I had to find some way to break the ice. So I spoke to them about the things I mentioned earlier, that you have to meet people where they're at. So when you're dealing with the geologists in these small exploration companies, understand their history, understand their context, understand their style, understand how they solve problems, so that the technical advice that you're giving them can be tailored appropriately. And you might, be pitching at completely different levels depending on which company and, what level that particular person is at. But in order to try and get them to understand what this meant, I decided to do an exercise which was a little bit risky. So the exercise was, I put up a question on the slides that said, how would you lead a person who is blindfolded across a room, avoiding obstacles, without being able to talk to them or make a sound, and without you being able to touch them? I mean, you can't go there with your hands and steer them. You can't. In fact, I'm going to make you put your hands in your pockets to make sure you don't use your hands or your arms in any way whatsoever. How would you lead them across a room? And they all looked at me very blankly. So I got them all up and I said, all right, so now let's all stand in a circle. Now, the first thing I want you to do is sway from side to side like this, shifting your weight until eventually your weight is coming off one foot and coming off the other foot. And already they were swaying from side to side, but the perplexed expressions were something to behold. Then I made them go backwards and forwards like this, so sway backwards and forwards. Okay. So now, sway from side to side, stop on your right foot. If you had to take a step now, what leg would you use? And of course they said the left. I said, exactly, because your weight is on the right. So part of what you need to understand when you're leading this person is, where do they have their weight and how are they going to move forward? And then I said, right, find a partner. The lead is going to put his hands in his pockets and is forbidden from talking. The follower can put their hands on the shoulders of the lead, but that's all. And they must keep their eyes closed. So there's no communication here. There's no instructions. And the lead is now going to guide you around the room. And I sat there literally shivering, thinking, am I going to get these technical geologists who are not touchy-feely at the best of times to do this exercise? And they committed to it. With great gusto. They started swaying, and then they started swaying backwards and forwards, and then they got the person who was following them to come with them. And within 4 minutes, they'd led the person across the room. And then I said, okay, you can open your eyes and the others can take your hands out your pockets now. I want to give I want you all to give yourselves a round of applause for having just passed lesson 1 of the tango. But of course they were completely, what is she saying? And then we sat down and debriefed the exercise. And I said, all right, how uncomfortable was that and why was it uncomfortable? So, of course, most of them said it was very uncomfortable. And it was uncomfortable because I had my eyes closed and I didn't know where the other person was leading me. I said, all right, so in the coaching relationship, you're going to coach somebody who's never had coaching before. And it's like almost like they're blindfolded. They don't know where you're leading them to. So there will be a degree of discomfort. You have to understand that that level of discomfort is in any coaching relationship. How do you create a rhythm that allows them to follow you and trust you, even though they're not exactly sure where you're leading them? Then I said, all right, why else was it uncomfortable? No, it was uncomfortable because I couldn't just tell them where to go. So another thing about coaching is you guide people through asking questions, through showing them good practice, but without providing them the answer. The whole art of coaching is not just to give people the answers. It would be the equivalent if you always tie a child's shoelaces. They'll be 18 years old and they still won't be able to tie their own shoelaces. They'll still be waiting for mommy to tie their shoelaces. The idea here is to show them how to do things, but they need to learn how to do those things, how to take decisions, how to interpret the data on their own. So we went through what they'd been experiencing in this first lesson of tango. Oh, the other thing was I didn't feel I had the right skills to be doing this. And then we compared that to coaching technical skills. And by the end of all of that, they all burst into applause and said, okay, we get it. We finally get it. So it was a bit of a risky exercise, but it worked brilliantly.
I love the story for this example rather for so many reasons, because, and the reason I wanted you to share this with the audience is to give a sense of what your coaching is like, because once upon a time you coached me too. I'm not sure if you recall in your home on my board members in my life. And having a coach and to be coached by the right people is such an important factor for growth and success, because no person is an island. And I can only imagine what the coaching sessions between you and mom must have been like, in equal measure of tough. Again, with the values, very strong values-based approach, but also in the fun aspect, right? In that not everything needs to be boring or the same or mundane. Life is meant to be enjoyed. Life is meant to be, that passionate side can be fully, created with as much enjoyment as the toughness around it. And if there's one thing I know about my mother is that in as much as she gave tough love and she was a tough woman, where it came from was absolutely a place of gold and pure intent, but she loved to have fun and she loved to have a laugh and she loved to bring the mischief and the childlike frivolity to as many situations as she possibly could and would allow. So I also wanted you to share this example, because if anybody is looking for a great coach, I would highly recommend Italia. You have absolutely been instrumental in, the successes that mom took and owned and drove. It absolutely took somebody like you and your experience and your methods for, taking her from, I suppose, if I could put it so loosely, the average to the exceptional. And like I said, that extended in every facet and area of her life that you would think she was triple the human that she was, right? So with this, Italia, thank you for sharing so freely, so authentically, so effortlessly. Your wisdom, your experience, your knowledge resonates. How you have captured mom is absolutely wonderful. You have done it in such a beautiful, soft, yet poignant way that will share with anyone listening another depth and layer to this human being that will live on forever. So thank you. To conclude this episode, we always conclude with a question to each of our guests, and that is, who lifted you up today and how are you lifting others?
I think today I can't say because it's still early in the day. But in my career, I had two very significant mentors, and I had at different points of my career two executive coaches. And those four people, I would say, had a dramatic impact on the success of my career. So I put a lot of weight into the impact that having the right person as a sounding board, having the right person to advise you would have. It makes a huge difference.
And in terms of the other part of the question of how are you lifting others up, I think I already, and you sharing so freely all you have today, it really has lifted me up in so many ways. And I have no doubt that every one of our listeners will feel exactly the same way. So please do not be surprised if you get a flood of people coming your way after listening to this episode to lean into you and your expertise. Again, I want to say a heartfelt thank you for everything that you've so freely shared. It's been an absolute delight having you here today and giving so freely, not just of your time, but of yourself and your memories and just all of you. And to our production manager, Vic, the man behind the lens, and the editor, and the person that helps us to bring all of this content to life, thank you from all of us at the Team LiftUp. Thank you for being a part of our team. To Dad, Claude Mohanathan, and Pranay Govender, thank you for the ideation and the inspiration for creating this outlet, this legacy outlet to capture Sandy Mohanathan until the end of time in a digital way. And to each and every one of our listeners, thank you for liking, subscribing, taking and giving your time to listen in and share your feedback and reach out to every single one of us, and to know that this is lifting each one of you up as we all journey this grief of together and the loss of Sandy Mohanathan. So thank you. Please continue to like, subscribe, share this podcast with as many as possible. But until next time, thank you for joining us, and may you continue to live to lift up in every facet of your lives. Thank you very much.